Have you seen that viral dumpling lasagna going around? Well, it looked so good. But I wanted to put my own spin on it and recreate it in a shared family dish instead of individual ramekins. Because I'm all about real food for everyday life, I wanted to make it as approachable as it is delicious. I'm Anya, and welcome back to my channel here at Prepare and Nourish. What's a dumpling lasagna? Well, I'm glad you asked. Think of your favorite flavors of a dumpling, but in the form of a lasagna. So instead of lasagna sheets, we're going to use wonton wrappers or dumpling wrappers. And for our meat mixture, we're going to use very similar, familiar flavors that would go like in an Asian dumpling. So there's going to be ground meat, some vegetables, soy sauce, ginger garlic, all of those very delicious umami flavors. And then we're going to bake all of that in the oven, just like you would a lasagna. Okay, let's talk about the ingredients first. Now, all of the recipes that I saw for dumpling lasagna called for ground pork, but I usually have a very hard time sourcing quality ground pork, and so I'm going with ground chicken, and it's usually a good sub for ground pork, so this will work just as well. And I'm doing 2 pounds of ground chicken. And in addition to the chicken, I'll also add half a head of cabbage, some green onions, just the white parts of the green onions, finely grated carrots. And here you have the regular Asian umami flavors like soy sauce, mirin, and then we have rice vinegar, honey to balance some of that savory, deep flavors. And then the sesame oil is going to be more like a finishing drizzle. This doesn't have a very high smoke point, so I don't like using it in recipes where I have to cook it. And so instead, what I like to do is I like to add it at the end of cooking. And of course, we'll need a few cloves of garlic and some ground ginger. And I like to use this because it's just easy. Instead of lasagna sheets, we're going to use these wonton wrappers. We're going to start with the filling for the lasagna. First up are the carrots. I'm using 2 carrots here, and I like to finely grate them rather than chop. Over time, I found that the finer the carrots are, the better they melt into the meat mixture. They almost disappear as everything cooks, which gives you the added benefit of extra flavor and moisture without changing the texture of the filling. Next, we'll move on to the green onions. Since I already have my knife and cutting board out, this is the perfect time to prep the entire bunch. Even though only the white parts are going into the lasagna filling, it's more efficient to just cut everything at once rather than come back to it later. The white portions are what we want for cooking because they're sturdier and hold up well to heat. They soften nicely and add flavor without losing their structure. But if a few green pieces sneak in, that's completely fine. Nothing needs to be overly precise here, but generally speaking, the greens are better saved for finishing and garnishing. They're more delicate, and adding them at the end keeps their fresh flavor and slight crunch intact. While I'm working through the bunch, I'll go ahead and slice the green tops on a slight bias. This is mostly for presentation, but it also makes them easier to sprinkle evenly over the dish. Next, we're going to shred the Napa cabbage. I start by cutting it in half lengthwise and removing the core. We're only using half of the head for the filling, and the other half will be used in the salad later. After removing the core, I cut the cabbage into quarters, then into eighths, and slice crosswise into small shreds. I like keeping the pieces fairly thin so they cook down evenly and blend smoothly into the filling rather than staying bulky. Once all the vegetables are prepped, we're ready to bring the filling together. In a large bowl, add 2 pounds of ground chicken. This is my go-to, but you can absolutely use ground pork or a mix of chicken and pork if you want a slightly richer filling with a bit more fat. To the bowl, add all of the prepped vegetables. This is where everything starts to come together. The vegetables distribute throughout the meat, adding moisture, flavor, and a softer texture as the filling cooks. To this mixture, we'll add minced garlic and minced ginger. Then come the seasonings: rice vinegar, mirin, soy sauce, and just a small drizzle of honey. Finish with salt and black pepper. At this point, I like to use a glove and gently mix everything together. You want the ingredients evenly distributed, but try not to overmix because overworking the meat can make the filling dense and tough, whereas a lighter hand keeps the texture tender. Another approach that works well is mixing the vegetables and seasonings first, then adding the meat. Then it's time to assemble everything. I start by adding a layer of the meat filling to the bottom of a large pan or skillet. I like using a spring cookie scoop here because it makes portioning easier and gives you a consistent amount every time. Once the filling is in, I go in with the back of a spoon and gently smooth it out into an even layer. Next comes the first layer of wonton wrappers, followed by another layer of meat. If you're working with only 1 pound of meat instead of two, this is where you'd want to scale things down. Use a smaller pan and fewer wrappers so the ratios stay balanced. Continue layering the remaining filling, building up the structure and alternating layers of meat and wrappers. I usually end up with 3 layers of meat total when using 2 pounds of ground meat. When spreading the meat, try to push it as close to the edges of the pan as you can. The filling will naturally shrink as it cooks, so starting edge to edge helps maintain those clean layers in the finished dish. And before this goes into the oven, we're going to add a little bit of broth. Chicken broth works perfectly here, and I'm just adding it around the outer edges of the lasagna. This helps create steam as the dish cooks, which softens the wonton wrappers and keeps everything from drying out. As you can see, my broth is straight from the fridge and still quite solid. I don't bother heating it. Once it goes into the oven, it will melt naturally and slowly seep through the layers. I also want to mention the lid. If you're using a pan with a lid that has those small raised bumps, often called self-basting spikes, this is a great place to use it. As steam builds during cooking, it condenses on the lid, collects on those bumps, and then gently drips back down into the dish. This helps maintain a more humid cooking environment, which is exactly what we want for softening the wrappers and keeping the filling nice and tender. Cook the lasagna completely covered. We're not going for crispy edges here. The goal is a soft, tender texture, very similar to traditional dumplings. Once it's out of the oven, it's time to serve. I like finishing the dumpling lasagna with a light drizzle of toasted sesame oil because remember, we didn't add this to the meat mixture because of the low smoke point. But I love the sesame oil because it adds a subtle richness and ties all the flavors together. Then I'll spoon over a bit of chili crisp and scatter some green onions across the top. What I really love about this dish is how naturally everything works together. You've got those familiar dumpling flavors, garlic, ginger, soy, sesame, but in a format that's much easier to assemble and serve. It feels both comforting and a little unexpected at the same time. If you'd like the full recipes with exact measurements and all of my tips, you can find that on my website at preparenourish.com. And while you're there, make sure you explore other nourishing recipes, everything from ferments to organ meats and real food dinners like this one today. And if this kind of content resonates with you, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss out on the next episode of Real Food Dinners for Everyday Life. Eat well, be nourished, and I'll see you in the next one.